Welcome to the Alpha Consulting KE Amazing Mom webinar. I'm very glad that you've taken the time to connect with me on your trauma healing journey. My name is Moraya Mwangi from Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm glad to be taking you through this very brief session regarding trauma healing. And the first thing I'd like us to look at is to ask ourselves these 5 questions. When was the last time you slept in? Or when was the last time you slept early as a mother? Are you carrying the burden of being the first to rise and the last to be in bed, because if you don't do it, everything else will go wrong? Another question I'd like you to ask yourself is, when was the last time you had or you enjoyed a very long time in the shower, just taking care of yourself, enjoying your shower without thinking of the next thing that awaits you after that brief, very important engagement for yourself? The third question would be, and this is a big one, when was the last time you said exactly what you meant? Great. Number 4, I'd like us to ask ourselves, when was the last time you really felt your experiences? When was the last time you sat and said, I felt that? Or are you finding yourself in a loop of experiences, not knowing how to manage? You feel you can't stop some of them and you just feel like you're caught up in the loop of life. And finally, I'd like us to ask ourselves, I love dash. Whatever you write in that dash doesn't matter for this session, but I do hope that it changes or it becomes clearer by the next session that we have, which is next week at the same time. The answers that you've written there for yourself are very important because they do tell you where you currently are at. And now, in line with trauma healing, I'd just like us to, first of all, familiarize ourselves with some of the synonyms that are associated with recreating and just starting again. Okay, so if you have pen and paper, I'd like you to write this down. The word is renovate, reawaken, reaffirm, repair, and resuscitate. If any of those words resonate with you, I'd like you to circle the one that you feel you'd like to identify with for the purpose of this session, and I pray that you'll be able to live up to that experience, because the inner you is relying on your courage and your boldness to be able to stand up for them and represent them in a worthy way. So the first part of our session today is about recreating, and the stages of recreating for us today are relaxing, remembering, and restoring. And the first word, I'd like you to break it down if you have pen and paper and write the word re-lax. And the meaning of lax or being lax is to reduce strictness and also loosen control. And so many times after going through trauma, we find that we are caught in a need for strictness, even on ourselves, to be able to live to the standards of those we think or we believe we need to cope with, for whatever reason that puts us in that situation. And also the control part is that you want to be in control, but because of the trauma and its limitations, you're afraid of letting yourself go because you believe that you will look like you're out of control. So I'd like us to just associate those words with the word relax. Our second word is remember, and I'd like us to consider some of the various meanings of the word member, which would be fragments. All right, and I'd like you to see yourself as the different parts of you because you are one person, but you are made up of different parts of your life experience. And the purpose of that is to hopefully help you through the coming week to be able to remember the parts of you and be able to form that one strong you that you need to be able to move on in life. Apart from fragments, the other word would be pieces. And mostly when you've been through trauma, we get broken. And anything that breaks usually breaks into pieces. And I'd like us to kind of like bring ourselves to that point of what pieces am I holding in my hands from my trauma experience, right? And the last word being restore. And what I'd like us to consider in regard to restore is accumulation. And that's a very big word for someone who's been through trauma, because what trauma does is it accumulates within you. Those parts that we are talking about, some of those parts have accumulated with a lot of unprocessed trauma, which sometimes may be referred to as unfinished business. Another word that we will associate with restore is to organize. I hope that by the last session, which will be next week, you will be able to reorganize yourself, the inner you, after you've at least begun to call out, those things that have been causing you to stay in that trauma experience. All right. So I'd like us to move on after recreating and understanding what our next week will look like, is to move on to re-energizing. When something already exists and we have to come in, pause that existence, redefine that existence, it takes a lot from us. And especially if you've been through trauma that was unprocessed or unaccepted or unlabeled, you find yourself in a space of feeling very drained emotionally, physically, psychologically, socially. You prefer to hide away parts of you that actually do need to be brought out so that they can heal. And so I'd like us to also consider the word energy on your trauma healing journey with me. And the word energy, I'd like us to look at open energy and blocked energy. And when your energy is blocked, just imagine a lot of things wanting to come into, assume it's knowledge. Let's say you need to know about something as a mom, and a lot of knowledge, you need it to enter, but then immediately it gets here, it just stays there. So there's so much needing to get in, but because there's a cloud around you that's trauma related, that information doesn't have access to you, and you also can't access that information no matter how hard you try because of this cloud around you that is trauma related. So I'm hoping that during this next week, from the lessons we take from this class, we will be able to remove that energy blockage and be able to open up to receive what we need. All right. And one of the things that naturally happens is that our energy blocks happen in the mind, because the mind is what is communicating and engaging with all our life experiences. What just happened? Why did they do that? Why did they say that? Why did they say it like that? Why is this happening to me now? All right. Do I deserve this? So there's a lot of engagement, a lot of silent or intangible conversation that's happening in your mind. And that's why you have that block. Because the trauma is trying to, it lies to you, you're safe, but it's there to just kind of like oppress you, suppress you, and put you in a place of there's no need to try, or that lie of there's nothing new that will actually come and help me. I am damaged goods, or I am not worthy, or it won't be enough. No matter how hard I try to heal, it will never be enough. And so I'd like us to imagine now the opposite of energy blocks and see open energy. And naturally, this for a woman would probably be in her uterus. Now, if you're here and maybe you've been through a life experience that required for you not to have your uterus, I'd like us to revert to our original sense of being when we were innocent before that trauma experience, and just that we were whole when nothing had been taken away from us. And I'd just like us to imagine as a mom that your uterus is where everything opens up so that you can be able to receive, nurture, and birth life. All right? If you're a mom who has adopted, you have still gone through that uterus experience because a lot of motherhood instincts do lie there. So no one is disqualified for this, and I just needed to explain that as you think of opening up any energy block that you believe you might have, it might be a good idea to relate it with the inner you, the uterus that is well hidden, just so that it can fulfill the purpose of bringing new life. All right? Great. I'd like us to go into the word energy a little more deeply. And we had already agreed that it will take or require a lot of energy for you to be able to go through what you need to go through, to trauma heal, to trauma process, to trauma label, to trauma recover. All that will need a lot of energy from you. And the physical definition of energy is it's a property of matter and radiation. So energy in the physics world is defined as a property of matter and radiation, which is manifest as a capacity to perform work. This is not a physics class, but I'd like us to break that down so that we understand as moms, how would we relate to that definition of energy. And I'd like us to just break down that definition into parts. So if you're using pen and paper, maybe you'd write the word matter and write that's me. All right, matter is me. And radiation is how I manifest, how I show up, how I present. And then which is manifest as a capacity. All right, so that means that there is weight associated to my being, to my presence, to my maneuvering, to my access, to my experience with myself, with my child, with my family. There's a measure of it. And finally, to perform work. And work will be who you are as a mom. Don't really look at the work experience like the career, because that's not from within. It's really an external experience. But I'd like us to look at motherhood as our divine work, that God has entrusted us as moms to be able to bring our energy into the presence of our children, to transform their lives, and also our partners and our families, just to be able to make that impact. So I'd like us to redefine energy as moms on a motherhood journey and say that my energy is how I manifest, how I show up, and in my capacity, in my ability, in my awesomeness to perform my motherhood calling. All right? And I know at this point, a lot of things would begin to come up. Am I doing this very well? Am I doing this excellently? Am I doing it to the standard that I have set for myself? And I'll just encourage you to kind of like take a chill and realize that as a mom, even with your third child, your first child, your second child, every experience is very unique. And I'd like you to extend yourself some grace and begin to work on the most important part of this session today, which is recreating. Remember, before we defined the recreation journey into 3 parts, which was relaxing, remembering, and restoring. So even during the next week, I'd like you to take some time and begin to process that and ask yourself, great, what do I need to relax on? Where do I need to be less strict with myself? Where do I need to let go of the control that I've held over myself regarding this trauma issue? Then you go deeper during the week and say, great, what parts do I need to remember, all right, about myself? Remember, different members brought together to form a whole you. All right, what do I need to remember so that I can re-identify myself? So because I need to restore this. And we already said that restoring refers to organization. We want our minds, our bodies to be able to reorganize who we are after our trauma experience. And so as we now go deeper into that recreation journey, I'd like us to think of the word recreate and what it means to you. If you have some time, write that down in your notebook or in your journal. What would recreate for me mean as a trauma healing part of my journey? And the two words that stood out for me during my research, and two words that I feel that have really enabled me in my own personal journey, are reproduce and reenact. And as mothers, we have been identified with, oh, you reproduce, you gave birth, you mothered, you partnered well with your partner, and it feels like we are doing a lot of reproducing every day. But with that trauma hidden somewhere, it feels like being held hostage, right? So you're living your life, but there's someone inside you that's still holding you hostage. And it's time to break free. It's time to say, I want to be able to enjoy this experience without feeling like I am being held hostage. And the word reproduce, for us who are human, I would like to refer to it as the ability to produce something very similar to something else. So the word reproduce would mean that it's an ability to produce something very, very similar to something else in a different context. All right, so you have already lived your life. We have already lived our lives to the point that we are at now. But because we have the gift of reproduction, I would like us in the next week to take a moment and say, I am ready to reproduce myself. I am ready to reorganize myself. I am ready to remember the parts of me and set them in a way that serves me for success. I am ready to restore my life journey to the way that I feel that it needs to be. And so it will be still you, your life, your experience, but on your terms, that you're able to assign meaning to that trauma and also be able to label it, place it, and refer to it without feeling that trigger that usually happens. And the next word was reenact. And this stood out for me because I feel like after you've been through trauma, you don't want to go back to those places. You don't want to go back to those experiences because some of them were terrible, others were unexpected, others were there for a long time, and you're glad you're even where you're at today. And I'd like us to just think that if I had an opportunity to reenact that experience so that I could heal from it, not so that I could revisit it. No, I know it and I know it very well. I experienced it, but it's time for me to be able to label it so that I can be able to reenact my life now on my terms because I have made peace with that experience. And the word reenact from my research, the one that I choose to go with for my purpose of trauma healing, is maybe bringing a law that has expired back into the books, or simply just effecting it again because it was a default setting. And for us who are moms, the Word of God says that we are already blessed to be able to serve God as mothers, to be able to serve our families in the capacity of mothers. And so I'd like us to go back to the default setting regarding motherhood, default setting regarding who we were as children, default setting regarding who we were during the time which we experienced that trauma. Before that trauma, there was already a setting defined and declared by the Lord that we should be able to walk in.